On the morning of the 30th of April, 1943, at the height of World War II, fisherman Jose Antonio Rey Maria was out on his boat, just off the coast of Andalusia in Spain, when he saw a strange object floating in the water. On closer inspection, this turned out to be the body of a dead British soldier. He hauled the body over the side of his boat, took it back to the beach, and reported his find to the local authorities. He had no way of knowing it at the time, but he had just set into motion what could arguably be considered one of the greatest acts of wartime deception ever: Operation Mincemeat. By 1942, Nazi expansion was at its height, and the vast majority of continental Europe was now under German domination. In an attempt to break the Nazi stranglehold and hopefully turn the tide of the war, Britain and other Allied forces were busy preparing an invasion, codenamed Operation Husky. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted to attack what he referred to as the soft underbelly of Europe, by which he meant the Mediterranean, and invade via Italy. Sicily was chosen as the most tactically viable location from which to launch this attack. However, the Allies were deeply concerned that the Germans would correctly predict their plan. Hitler, though, was paranoid about an attack on the Balkans, and this was where the Germans obtained a lot of their raw materials from, making control of the region vital for the Axis powers. The Allies were well aware of this fear and planned to exploit it by putting into play a campaign of bluff and confusion, Operation Barclay, which was designed to direct attention away from Sicily. The operation was wide-ranging and took place over several months. It included false radio traffic, misinformation about troop deployments, and even the creation of an entire imaginary army. The origins of Operation Mincemeat can be traced back to a 1939 memo, known as the Trout Memo, that was released under the name of Admiral John Godfrey, the director of Britain's Naval Intelligence Division. The more likely author, though, was Godfrey's assistant, a certain Ian Fleming, who would go on to become famous as the creator of the fictional James Bond character. The Trout Memo detailed 51 deceptions that could be conceivably used to trick the enemy. Number 28 on the list was entitled "A Suggestion, but Not a Very Nice One," and described the idea that a corpse of a British airman, with dispatches containing misinformation placed in his clothing, could be parachuted behind enemy lines. Towards the end of 1942, Charles Chumley, a British intelligence officer working for MI5, began to develop what would eventually become Operation Mincemeat. He took inspiration not only from the Trout Memo, but also an incident that had occurred less than a month prior. A plane carrying a British officer, Paymaster Lieutenant James Hardin Turner, and a French agent had been shot down off the coast of Cadiz, and it was known that, despite Spain being a supposedly neutral country, that some of the documents they had on them had been passed on to the Germans. Although there were initial misgivings to the plan, Ewan Montague from the Naval Intelligence Division was brought in to work with Chumley to see if his plan could be developed into something workable. Their first job was to find a suitable cadaver. This was a lot harder than one might imagine in the midst of the bloodiest war in human history. After all, they could not just use any corpse. They needed a man of serving age with no obvious cause of death. Added to this, of course, were the moral and legal implications of using a dead body for their intended purpose. To help in this endeavor, Montague approached a contact of his, Bentley Purchase, the coroner of St. Pancras in northwest London, and asked him to keep an eye out for a suitable candidate. This is where a man by the name of Glendor Michael enters the story. Michael was born in 1909 in the Welsh mining town of Aberbargoed. The records of his life are sparse, but by all accounts, it was a tragic one, spent in abject poverty. When he was 16, his father, a miner and the family's main breadwinner, died. After this, the family was entirely dependent on alms for survival. Michael earned a meager living doing odd jobs around town, but after his mother's death in 1940, his life seems to have further disintegrated. The circumstances are not entirely clear, but by the winter of 1942, Michael had drifted to London, where he spent time between a lodging house, an asylum, and the streets. On the evening of the 22nd of January 1943, he was found in a warehouse close to King's Cross, dying after having ingested rat poison. He was taken to St. Pancras Hospital, where it took him 2 days to die. Michael's death was officially ruled a suicide. However, this is not definitive, as the poison he ingested was spread on a slice of bread. He may have simply just been very hungry. Purchase informed Chumley and Montague of the death and told the registrar that the body was to be removed out of England for burial, allowing them to take custody of Michael's remains. It was not possible to freeze the body, as this would have caused noticeable damage to the soft tissue. Instead, Michael was placed in an extra-cold refrigerator. Even so, it was estimated that they had a maximum of 3 months before his state of decomposition would be too far advanced to be of any use.
Send hackers to Greece instead of Sicily and protect your personal data with NordVPN. The amount of information we put on our devices in this day and age is greater than the amount of information transmitted between countries during World War II, and hackers building their own Enigma machines can get a hold of your personal data quicker than German forces swallowed Operation Mincemeat. Keep your personal information safe with NordVPN. Using NordVPN, you can block trackers, prevent maliciously intrusive ads and harmful websites, and shield your identity more effectively than the Allies hid Glyndŵr Michaels. It's threat protection, which you enable through the app settings, transmits data through a securely encrypted tunnel with stronger protection than that on the HMS Seraph. Guaranteed high cybersecurity without losing any speed or responsiveness. Like the Allies used many channels to conduct Operation Mincemeat, you too have flexibility, with the ability to use NordVPN on up to 6 devices at any one time. Overcome blocked online content and your country's restrictions, whether it's a website or your favorite videos that are unavailable in your country. Act quickly before they gather the troops. Go to nordvpn.com/simplehistory or click the link in the description to get an exclusive discount on the 2-year plan and the free anti-malware. Protect your data risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee.
Operation Mincemeat was now working on a time limit. With the problem of the body solved, Chumley and Montague set about creating a persona for their fictional soldier. They named him William Bill Martin and decided that he should be an acting major in the Royal Marines. Various pieces of wallet or pocket litter, a term used by British intelligence during the war, were to be placed on his body to attest to the fact that he was a real person. These included letters from his father and bank manager, which demonstrated that he was a beloved son who was perhaps a little careless with his money. A photograph and love letters from his fiancée, as well as a receipt from a well-known London jeweler for an engagement ring and ticket stubs for the theater, all added to the picture. Perhaps the most challenging part of Major Martin's wallet litter was his identification card, as this required a photograph. Despite their best efforts to take a suitable photo of Michael, he simply could not be induced to look lifelike for the camera, and sadly, their attempts are the only known photographs of Glyndŵr Michael that were ever taken. A search was begun to find a serving officer who had a close enough resemblance to pass for Michael. One day at a meeting to discuss double agents, Montague found himself seated opposite Captain Ronnie Reed, an MI5 officer, whom Montague claimed could have been the dead man's twin brother. The final and most important items that had to be placed on the body were 2 letters, one from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye to General Sir Harold Alexander, and another from Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral of the Fleet Sir Andrew Cunningham. The overall aim of these letters was to convince the Germans that Montgomery would be attacking 2 places in Greece and that General Eisenhower would be launching a separate assault on Sardinia, codenamed Operation Brimstone. That the decoy location for this fictional operation was given as Sicily was a clever but particularly risky detail, as it meant that if the Germans did pick up any signs that there was an imminent attack on Sicily, they would assume it was part of the diversion. If, however, Operation Mincemeat was a failure and the attempt at deception was discovered, it would be virtually confirming Sicily as the actual target for the invasion. The letters were carefully folded, with a single eyelash put in each, and the wax seals of each envelope were carefully photographed in order to make it possible to detect any later evidence of tampering. These were placed in a locked briefcase that was to be chained to the Major's wrist during his journey. By the 17th of April, the plan was ready to be put into action. Chumley and Montague met at the morgue to prepare Michael's body. He had already been put into a uniform, as no one wanted to find out at the last moment that it did not fit. So all that was left to do was to chain the briefcase to his wrist, fill his pockets with the various pieces of litter they had accumulated, and put his boots on. They ran into a last-minute problem when it was discovered that Michael's feet and ankles had frozen completely solid. The solution, which Chumley described as the most macabre part of the whole operation, was to find an electric fire to defrost the joints until the boots could be slipped on. When this was done, Michael was placed inside a canister that had been specially designed to keep his body as well preserved as possible during transit and loaded into the back of a van. Then followed a high-speed overnight drive to Greenock on the west coast of Scotland, where the submarine HMS Seraph was waiting. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, was the only man on board who knew the truth about what the unusual canister they had been ordered to deliver actually contained. The rest of the crew had been informed that they were carrying a top-secret meteorological device. 11 days after leaving Scotland, the Seraph surfaced, just off the coast of Huelva, a little before dawn. The canister was brought on deck, and before it was opened, all crew members who were not officers were ordered below. Michael's body was lowered into the water, and Lieutenant Jewell recited as much of the funeral service, Psalm 39, as he could remember. He then ordered the engines full astern, which would help propel the body towards the shore. After disposing of the canister some distance away, Jewell sent a simple message back to the Admiralty: mincemeat completed. HMF Severus' role in the plan may well have been completed, but the success of the operation was still far from assured. The body of Major Martin was discovered at about 9:30 a.m. and then turned over to the Spanish authorities, who informed the local British consul, Francis Hazelden, who was already in on the plan, and arranged an autopsy. Hazelden made sure that he was present during the procedure, so as to confirm that the doctors arrived at the preferred conclusion. Michael's body was by now in a rather poor condition, and to make matters worse, the autopsy was taking place in a very small room on a very hot day. It didn't take long for Hazelden to suggest that, given the circumstances, perhaps they should all just go for lunch. The doctors were all too happy to comply and readily signed William Martin's death certificate, giving the cause of death as asphyxiation through immersion in the sea. Glendor Michael's body was finally laid to rest with full military honors on the 2nd of May, 3 months after his death, and under the name of Major William Martin in the Nuestra Señora Cemetery in Huelva. Once it was confirmed that the Spanish had taken possession of the documents, Cholmondeley and Montague began to send out supposedly encrypted messages inquiring as to their whereabouts. In reality, they knew full well that these would be intercepted and understood by the Nazis. Unfortunately for the British, the documents were being held by the Spanish Navy, the one branch of the Spanish authorities that was the least likely to cooperate with the Nazis. It took the German intelligence agency, the Abwehr, until the 8th of May to get access to the letters. Once they had recorded the information, the Germans returned the letters to the Spanish, who reinserted them into their envelopes, soaked them again in seawater, and gave them back to the British. Once the letters had been safely received in London, further encrypted messages were sent back to Spain, confirming that the letters had not been opened. In reality, forensic testing had proven that they absolutely had been opened. The eyelashes were missing, one of them showed evidence of having been refolded, and the strange way they curled up when fully dried out showed that they had been rolled up for extraction and reinsertion through the bottom flap of the envelope, a technique that left the seal intact. Confirmation that the Germans had received false intelligence came on the 14th of May, when the codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted a message stating that the real target for the invasion was the Balkans. A message was then sent to Churchill reading, "Mincemeat swallowed, hook, line, and sinker." Operation Mincemeat was one of the many tactics that were used to convince the Nazis that Sicily was not the intended target, and it is impossible to determine precisely how effective it was. What is known, though, is that the information carried by Major Martin spread throughout the German intelligence community and made its way through the ranks of the German High Command, before finally ending up on Adolf Hitler's desk. The invasion of Sicily began on the 9th of July, 1943, and the Germans had spent the weeks leading up to it moving troops and redeploying panzer divisions to defend Sardinia and the Greek islands. There was such confusion that even several hours after the attack had begun, German aircraft were being flown out of Sicily to defend Sardinia. The Allies had projected that Operation Husky would take 90 days to complete. In the end, Sicily fell after only 38. The losses of men and machines were also only a fraction of those initially projected. The name Glendor Michael was not intended to become public knowledge. It was only discovered in 1996 when an amateur historian who was leafing through some recently declassified documents stumbled across it. The following year, the British government had a small amendment made to the tombstone on Major Martin's grave. Glendor Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M.